Guilty. The word was a poisoned dart, aimed at 17-year-old honor student Jordan Carter. The arresting officer, Sergeant Thomas Keene, allowed a smirk. His perfect record was safe, and another kid was off the streets. He thought it was over. But then the judge leaned into her microphone, her voice a low, dangerous hum. "Officer Keene," Judge Miriam Holt began, sending a shockwave through the room. "I believe you have perjured yourself before this court, and I have the video to prove it." In the defendant's chair, 17-year-old Jordan Carter's shoulders begin to shake, his mother's grip on his hand so tight her knuckles have gone white. The veteran cop who arrested Jordan 6 months ago now stands rigid, watching as his 20-year career implodes in real time. What nobody in that courtroom yet realizes is that the surveillance footage about to be played will change all their lives forever and expose a truth that goes far beyond this single case. But to understand how we got here, how a routine traffic stop escalated into a case that would ultimately rock the foundations of the Millfield Police Department, we need to go back to where it all began, to a rainy Tuesday evening last October when Jordan Carter was simply trying to get home. Subscribe now to follow this gripping true story as it unfolds and discover how the lives of a police officer, a teenage honors student, and a non-nonsense judge collided in a case that forces us to question everything we think we know about truth and justice. The rain beats a steady rhythm against the roof of Jordan Carter's 2008 Honda Civic. Graduation tassels, blue and gold for Millfield High, dangle from the rearview mirror, swaying slightly with each careful turn. His varsity basketball jacket is folded neatly on the passenger seat, still carrying the faint smell of the gym where he'd stayed late, working on his three-point shot. College scouts had been showing interest, and the pressure to perform was mounting. Jordan glances at the dashboard clock, 9:47 p.m. He's already 17 minutes past curfew. His mother, Linda, will be pacing the living room by now, checking her phone every 30 seconds. It isn't like her son to be late without calling. The text he'd sent her 40 minutes ago. Stares up from the phone, mounted on his dash. Practice running long. Home by 9:30. 2 more minutes, and he'd be pulling into their driveway in the quiet subdivision where the Carters had lived for 12 years. Ever since Linda got the nursing supervisor position at Millfield General and could finally afford to move them out of the cramped apartment downtown, Jordan eases up to the 4-way stop at Maple and Birch, coming to a complete halt as he'd been taught. Rain blurs the empty intersection. He taps his left blinker, scanning carefully before proceeding. The headlights appear suddenly in his rearview mirror, high beams flaring white against the rain-slicked street. Jordan squints as the vehicle closes the gap between them with alarming speed. "What's this guy's problem?" he mutters, checking his speedometer. He's going exactly 5 km under the limit, the way his father had instructed during countless driving lessons before he deployed for his 3rd tour overseas. The high beams flash twice, insistent. Jordan feels his heart rate quicken, his palms suddenly slick against the steering wheel. He considers pulling over to let the aggressive driver pass when the roof of the vehicle behind him erupts in blue and red strobes. A police cruiser. For 3 eternal seconds, Jordan sits frozen, his father's voice echoing in his head. Hands on the wheel where they can see them. "Move slow. Say yes, sir, and no, sir." No sudden movements. The rain intensifies as Sergeant Thomas Keene steps out of his patrol car, one hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. He's 46, with 19 years on the force, and a face that has forgotten how to look anything but suspicious approaches the driver's side with practiced caution. Flashlight beam cutting through the darkness to illuminate the young black man behind the wheel. "License and registration," Keene says flatly, rain darkening the shoulders of his uniform. "Yes, sir," Jordan replies, his voice steady, despite the nervous flutter in his chest. "My license is in my wallet in my back pocket. My registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for them now if that's okay." Keen's flashlight beam doesn't waver. Slowly, what happens next will later become the crux of Sergeant Thomas Keen's testimony. According to his sworn statement, Jordan made a sudden furtive movement toward the glove compartment, a movement Keen would claim caused him to fear for his safety. In that moment, a routine traffic stop for a supposedly missed stop sign escalates with frightening speed, hands where I can see them. Keen barks, his right hand now firmly gripping his weapon. I was just... Jordan begins, confusion evident in his voice. Out of the vehicle now. 60 seconds later, Jordan Carter is standing in the pouring rain, hands against the roof of his car as Sergeant Thomas Keen conducts a search. By the time it's over, Jordan finds himself in handcuffs, being informed he's under arrest for possession of a controlled substance. A small bag of white powder Keen claims to have found tucked under the passenger seat. "That's not mine," Jordan protests, rain streaming down his face, mingling with tears of shock and fear. "I don't do drugs. I've never seen that before in my life." Keen's expression remains impassive as he recites Miranda rights over the howl of the wind. By the time Linda Carter receives the call from the police station, her son's future, bright with promise just hours earlier, hangs by the most tenuous of threads. At 42, Linda Carter has weathered many storms. Raising a son alone while her husband serves overseas has forged in her a resilience few could match. But the sight of Jordan, honor student, basketball captain, volunteer tutor, sitting hunched in a holding cell, breaks something in her that has never broken before. "Mom," he says when he sees her voice cracking, "I didn't do anything wrong." The public defender assigned to Jordan's case is Naomi Park, 36, with tired eyes and a caseload that keeps her awake most nights. She listens to Jordan's account with a practiced neutrality that masks her growing concern. The story has inconsistencies, but not on Jordan's part. "You're saying the officer claimed you ran a stop sign, but you're certain you came to a complete stop?" She confirms, making notes in a worn leather portfolio. "Yes, ma'am." Jordan nods emphatically. "Dad drilled it into me. Full stop. Count to 3, then proceed." Naomi taps her pen against the paper. "And you've never seen the substance Sergeant Thomas Keen allegedly found in your car?" "Never." Jordan's gaze is steady, unflinching, Miss Park. "I have a 385 GPA. I'm waiting to hear back from Duke and UNC about basketball scholarships. Why would I throw all that away? It's a good question, one that will become central to the case building around them. But for now, Naomi can only work with the facts at hand. An officer's word against a teenager's in a system where such contests rarely favor the latter. The arraignment is brief clinical. Jordan pleads not guilty. Judge Miriam Holt, 62, with a reputation for fairness that borders on severity, sets bail at an amount Linda can just barely manage by dipping into Jordan's college fund. As Jordan and Linda leave the courthouse, a local news crew captures their exit. Story that airs that evening casts subtle doubt. Honor student charged with drug possession claims innocence. The chyron beneath Jordan's face reads simply, "Local teen arrested." In the Millfield Police Department, Sergeant Thomas Keen sits at his desk completing paperwork on the Carter arrest. His partner, Det Laura Vega, leans against the doorframe of their shared office. "Tough break about the Carter kid," she says, studying Keen's face. "Basketball star, right? Headed to college." Keen doesn't look up. If he's smart enough for college, he should be smart enough not to have drugs in his car. Vega's gaze lingers a moment too long. She and Keen have been partners for 3 years, long enough for her to recognize the slight tightening around his eyes that suggests there's more to the story. But she doesn't press. Not yet. "His prelim is set for next week," she says instead. "Holt's courtroom." Now Keen does look up, a flicker of something concern perhaps crossing his features. "Holt. Great. Just what I need." The hanging judge who thinks cops are always lying. She doesn't think cops are always lying, Vega corrects mildly. She just doesn't assume they're always telling the truth. The distinction hangs between them unacknowledged but significant. As October gives way to November, the Carter case begins to attract attention beyond Millfield's borders. Local activists point to it as another example of racial profiling. The police union issues statements defending Keene's record. Jordan, released on bail but suspended from school pending resolution of the charges, watches his carefully planned future begin to unravel. College recruitment letters stop arriving. Friends grow distant, unsure what to believe. Even some teachers, people who have known Jordan for years, regard him with new uncertainty. Only Coach Reynolds, who's mentored Jordan since freshman year, remains steadfastly in his corner. "I've known that boy since he was 14, Reynolds tells anyone who will listen. He doesn't even drink soda, let alone mess with drugs. Linda, meanwhile, begins her own investigation. Working night shifts at the hospital to be available for her son during the day, she sacrifices sleep to pore over details of the arrest. Something about Sergeant Thomas Keene's account doesn't add up, particularly the location where he claimed to have stopped Jordan. "He said it was at Maple and Pine," she tells Naomi during a strategy meeting in the public defender cramped office. But Jordan's text to me just before being pulled over shows he was at Maple and Birch 3 blocks away. Naomi looks up sharply. "You still have that text with the timestamp?" Linda confirms, sliding her phone across the desk. It's a small discrepancy, but potentially significant. Naomi makes a note to subpoena traffic camera footage from both intersections, if such footage exists. In a town like Millfield, with a municipal budget constantly stretched thin, many traffic cameras are more deterrent than functional. What none of them know yet is that Naomi's request for footage will set in motion a chain of events that will crack open not just Jordan's case, but 5 others just like it. The preliminary hearing arrives on a cold, clear morning in early November. Judge Miriam Holt presides with the same stern efficiency that has earned her both respect and resentment throughout her 15-year tenure on the bench. Her silver hair is pulled back in a severe bun, half-moon reading glasses perched on the bridge of her nose as she reviews the case file. Sergeant Thomas Keene takes the stand first, his testimony, a practiced recitation of events, the missed stop sign, the suspicious behavior, the discovery of what field tests indicated was cocaine. Under questioning from the assistant district attorney, a young man named ADA Caleb Morton, eager to make his mark, Keene appears solid, unflappable. It's only when Naomi Park rises for cross-examination that the first hairline fractures appear in his account. "Sergeant Thomas Keene," Naomi begins, "you testified that you observed Jordan Carter failed to stop at the intersection of Maple and Pine." "Correct." "That's correct." "And what time did this occur?" "Approximately 9:45 p.m. Naomi approaches the witness stand, holding Linda's phone. "I'd like to enter this into evidence." A text message sent from the defendant's phone at 9:42 p.m. with location data showing he was at the intersection of Maple and Birch at that time, 3 blocks from where you claimed to have observed him. A murmur ripples through the courtroom. Judge Miriam Holt's gaze sharpens. "Objection," Morton interrupts. "The location data on a text message isn't reliable evidence of the defendant's exact position." "Your Honor," Naomi counters, "we've also subpoenaed traffic camera footage from both intersections for the time in question. If Sergeant Thomas Keene's account is accurate, it should clearly show my client running the stop sign at Maple and Pine." Judge Miriam Holt regards both attorneys thoughtfully before turning to Keene. "Officer, are you certain about the location where you initially observed the defendant?" Something flickers behind Keene's eyes, so brief it might have gone unnoticed if not for Judge Miriam Holt's particular talent for reading witnesses. "Yes, Your Honor. Maple and Pine." Holt makes a note. The court will review the traffic camera footage once it's made available. In the meantime, continue your cross-examination, Miss Park. Naomi proceeds to question Keene about the search of Jordan's car, the legal justification, the procedure followed, the handling of the alleged drugs. With each question, small inconsistencies in Keene's testimony begin to accumulate like snowflakes, individually insignificant, but collectively forming a pattern that gives Judge Miriam Holt pause. When Jordan takes the stand in his own defense, the contrast is striking. Where Keene's testimony felt rehearsed, Jordan speaks with raw authenticity about his confusion and fear during the traffic stop. When he describes his certainty about making a complete stop at the intersection, the way my dad taught me, several jurors nod imperceptibly. Judge Miriam Holt observes it all, her expression unreadable. When both sides have presented their preliminary arguments, she makes an unusual request. "I'd like to see the traffic camera footage from both locations before we proceed further," she announces. Court is adjourned until the footage can be reviewed as everyone files out. Dato. Laura Vega, present in the back of the courtroom throughout the proceedings, watches Keene with growing unease. The location discrepancy bothers her more than it should. It's the kind of detail Keene, meticulous to a fault, rarely gets wrong. Unless, of course, it wasn't a mistake at all. 2 days later, Judge Miriam Holt's chambers become the setting for a revelation that will change everything. Present are Naomi Park, Ada Caleb Morton, Detotore Laura Vega at Holt's specific request, and court technician Evan Brooks, who has spent hours reviewing the traffic camera footage from both intersections. "Mr. Brooks," Judge Miriam Holt begins, "please share your findings with us." Evan, 31 and uncomfortable with the tension in the room, clears his throat. "I reviewed footage from both camera locations for the evening of October 17th, between 9:30 and 1000 p.m. The Maple and Pine camera shows no Honda Civic matching the defendant's vehicle during that time period." Morton shifts in his seat. "That doesn't prove." Holt silences him with a raised hand, and Maple and Birch. The Maple and Birch camera clearly shows a Honda Civic matching the defendant's vehicle coming to a complete stop at the intersection at 9:43 p.m., consistent with the timestamp on the text message entered into evidence. The implications hang heavy in the air. "There's more," Evan continues reluctantly. "While reviewing the footage, I noticed something unusual about Sergeant Thomas Keene's patrol car. It appears in the Maple and Birch footage at 9:47 p.m., 4 minutes after the defendant's vehicle. But at no point does it appear in the Maple and Pine footage, where Sergeant Thomas Keene claimed the initial observation occurred." Judge Miriam Holt turns to Det. Laura Vega. "Detective, what do you make of this?" Vega chooses her words carefully, aware of the delicate position she occupies as Keene's partner. It suggests Sergeant Thomas Keene's recollection of events may be incomplete or deliberately falsified. Naomi adds quietly. The silence that follows is broken by Judge Miriam Holt. "Mr. Morton, in light of this evidence, does the state wish to reconsider its position?" Morton, caught between professional obligation and emerging doubt, hesitates. "Your Honor, while the footage raises questions about the traffic violation, it doesn't address the drugs found in the defendant's vehicle." "No," Holt agrees, "it doesn't, but it does cast significant doubt on the credibility of the arresting officer's testimony." "Detective Laura Vega, I'd like you to investigate this matter further, including a review of Sergeant Thomas Keene's previous arrests involving similar circumstances." As they leave the chambers, Naomi catches up with Det. Laura Vega in the hallway. "You've had suspicions about him before, haven't you?" she asks quietly. Vega doesn't immediately answer. When she does, her voice is heavy with the weight of divided loyalties. "Let's just say certain patterns have been difficult to ignore. The investigation that follows moves with surprising speed, driven by Judge Miriam Holt's unwavering demand for truth and det. Laura Vega's growing determination to uncover it, whatever the cost to her partnership with Keene. Records of Keene's arrests over the past 18 months reveal a disturbing pattern. 6 cases involving young Black or Hispanic drivers, all pulled over for minor traffic violations, all subsequently charged with drug possession based on evidence Keene claimed to find in their vehicles. In each case, the defendant eventually pleaded guilty, often on advice from overworked public defenders facing seemingly insurmountable odds against an officer's testimony. Jordan Carter's case might have followed the same trajectory, if not for 3 crucial differences. His mother's meticulous attention to detail, Naomi Park's willingness to dig deeper despite her caseload, and the existence of traffic camera footage that contradicted Keene's account. As December arrives, bringing with it a dusting of early snow to Millfield, the case against Jordan Carter begins to crumble. Judge Miriam Holt orders a full evidentiary hearing, an unusual step at this stage, to address the mounting questions surrounding Sergeant Thomas Keene's conduct. The courtroom is packed on the morning of the hearing. Local media has picked up the story, framing it as a potential case of police misconduct rather than a drug charge against a teenager. Jordan sits beside Naomi, shoulders straight, but hands betraying his nervousness as they fidget with a pen. Sergeant Thomas Keene arrives with his own attorney, a sign that the police department's unified support may be wavering. He avoids eye contact with Det. Laura Vega, who sits directly behind the prosecution table, a thick file folder in her lap. Judge Miriam Holt calls the court to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. These proceedings, she begins, have taken an unexpected turn that warrants thorough examination. We're here today to determine not only the validity of the charges against Jordan Carter, but the credibility of the evidence presented against him. She turns her penetrating gaze to Ada Caleb Morton. Does the state wish to make an opening statement? Morton rises, discomfort evident in the set of his shoulders. Your Honor, in light of certain developments in this investigation, the state requests a brief recess to confer with the district attorney regarding our position. Judge Miriam Holt's expression suggests she anticipated this. Granted, the court will recess for 30 minutes. The tension in the courtroom doesn't dissipate during the break. It intensifies. Spectators buzz with speculation. Journalists scribble notes. Linda Carter grips her son's hand. Both of them aware they're standing at the edge of a moment that could redefine his future. When court resumes, Morton's demeanor has visibly shifted. The eager young prosecutor has been replaced by a more subdued figure clearly operating under new instructions. Your Honor, he begins, after careful review of all available evidence, including the traffic camera footage and subsequent investigation conducted by Detective Laura Vega, the state moves to dismiss all charges against Jordan Carter. A collective gasp ripples through the courtroom. Furthermore, Morton continues, the district attorney's office has opened an internal investigation into Sergeant Thomas Keene's conduct in this and similar cases, with a view to possible criminal charges for evidence tampering and perjury. Judge Miriam Holt nods slowly, satisfaction evident despite her judicial poker face. The motion to dismiss is granted. Mr. Carter, you are free to go. This court extends its apology for the ordeal you have endured. For Jordan, the words barely register through the rush of relief flooding his system. Beside him, Linda silently weeps. Behind them, scattered applause breaks out, quickly silenced by the bafe, but significant nonetheless. As the courtroom begins to empty, Sergeant Thomas Keene sits motionless, the full impact of his actions and their consequences finally sinking in. Detective Laura Vega passes him without a word, placing her file on the prosecutor's table before exiting. That file contains more than just evidence of Keene's misconduct. It holds the stories of 6 other young lives disrupted by false accusations. Stories that will now be revisited, their convictions potentially overturned. Among them is Andre Miller, who lost his college scholarship after a guilty plea. Sofia Alvarez, whose nursing license was suspended, and Malik Harris, still serving an 18-month sentence. For Judge Miriam Holt, the Carter case represents both a failure and a correction of the system she has served for 15 years. As she removes her robes in her chambers later that afternoon, she reflects on how close they came to perpetuating an injustice, and how many similar injustices might have gone undetected. Jordan Carter steps out of the courthouse into the December sunlight, blinking as if awakening from a nightmare. Reporters call out questions. Cameras flash, but he moves through them in a daze, anchored only by his mother's steady presence beside him. "It's over," Linda whispers, her arm around his shoulders. "It's finally over." But is it? For Jordan, the dismissal of charges doesn't erase the trauma of his arrest, the suspension from school, the sidelong glances from people who still harbor doubts. His innocence has been legally affirmed, but the experience has left marks that will take time to fade. As the Carters drive home in silence, Jordan stares out the window at the familiar streets of Millfield, seeing them differently now. The town where he's grown up, where he's played basketball, studied for tests, dreamed of college, has revealed another face when he can never unsee. Yet, alongside the disillusionment, something else has begun to take root. A new understanding of justice, its fragility, its preciousness, and sometimes against all odds, its triumph. 2 weeks later, Dater Laura Vega sits across from Keene in a small interrogation room, the same room where Jordan Carter had professed his innocence months earlier. The irony isn't lost on either of them. "Why, Jim?" she asks simply. "You had a good record, commendations, respect." Keene stares at his hands, the fight gone out of him. "It started small," he admits. "A planted baggie here, a discovered container there. All people I was sure were guilty anyway. I just helped the evidence along. These were kids, Jim. Kids with futures. They were suspects," he corrects automatically. Then sighs. "At least that's what I told myself. The confession that follows will eventually become part of Keene's plea deal. 6 counts of evidence tampering. 6 counts of falsifying police reports. 6 young lives he altered with calculated deceit. His motivations. A complex tangle of department pressure for drug arrests, personal biases he'd never acknowledged, and a gradual moral corrosion that happens when power goes unchecked, offer explanation, but not excuse. For Jordan Carter, January brings reinstatement at school and the revival of college prospects. The basketball scouts return, some with scholarships still on the table. His story, now framed as one of resilience against injustice, has made him something of a local celebrity, though it's an attention he neither sought nor enjoys. In a quiet moment after practice, Coach Reynolds finds him sitting alone in the empty gymnasium, bouncing a basketball thoughtfully. "Penny, for your thoughts," the coach offers, sliding onto the bench beside him. Jordan catches the ball, holding it still. "I keep thinking about the others, the ones who pleaded guilty because they didn't have the evidence I had, or a mom like mine, or a lawyer who actually had time to listen." Reynolds nods slowly. "Judge Miriam Holtz ordered a review of all of Keene's cases. It'll take time, but they'll get there. Some of them are still in jail," Jordan points out. "Right now, tonight." "Yes," Reynolds acknowledges, unable to offer false comfort. "They are." Jordan bounces the ball once hard. "When this all started, all I wanted was for people to believe I was innocent. Now he trails off, searching for words. Now you want something more." Reynolds finishes for him. "I want change." Jordan confirms, his voice stronger. "Real change." The conversation plants a seed that will eventually alter Jordan's path, though will still attend college on a basketball scholarship. His major will shift from business to pre-law, his focus narrowing to criminal justice reform. The trauma of his experience is transforming gradually into purpose. Judge Miriam Holt, meanwhile, finds herself at a career crossroads. The Carter case has reinvigorated her commitment to judicial oversight, but also highlighted the system's deep vulnerabilities. When approached about a position on the state's newly formed Police Accountability Commission, she sees an opportunity to address those vulnerabilities directly. "I've spent 15 years reacting to injustice after it occurs," she tells her husband the night she accepts the position. "Maybe it's time to help prevent it instead." The commission's work will be challenging, met with resistance from police unions and skepticism from community activists who have heard promises of reform before. But Holt brings to it the same unflinching scrutiny that uncovered Keene's misconduct and a renewed conviction that justice depends on more than blind faith in authority. On a bright morning in May, 7 months after his arrest, Jordan Carter sits in Judge Miriam Holt's courtroom one final time. The occasion is the formal exoneration of all 6 defendants from Keene's previous cases, including Malik Harris, recently released from prison. As Jordan watches these strangers whose fates were entangled with his through one corrupt officer's actions, he feels a complex mix of emotions. Relief that justice has finally been served, anger at how long it took, and a sobering awareness that for every case discovered and corrected, others likely remain buried. After the hearing, Linda finds him standing alone in the courthouse corridor, lost in thought. "You okay?" she asks, studying his face. Jordan nods slowly. "I was just thinking about Dad, what he always says about stopping completely at intersections." 3 seconds, Linda smiles. "Count to 3. If I hadn't done that, if I'd rolled through that stop sign even a little, Keene would have had an actual reason to pull me over. The traffic camera wouldn't have contradicted him. We might never have known about the others. The realization is humbling. How easily things might have gone differently. How thin the line between justice and its miscarriage." As they leave the courthouse together, stepping into spring sunshine that feels somehow more precious than before, Jordan carries with him not just his vindication, but a deeper understanding of both injustice's pervasiveness and justice's possibility. His story, begun in fear and confusion on a rainy October night, doesn't end with the dismissal of charges or even with Keene's eventual guilty plea. It continues in the lives of those affected by the case, in Judge Miriam Holt's work on the commission, in Detro, Laura Vega's more vigilant approach to her partner's conduct, in Naomi Park's renewed commitment to questioning evidence that seems too neat, too convenient. And it continues in Jordan himself, who will carry the experience into college, into law school, and eventually back to Millfield as an attorney committed to ensuring that other teenagers caught in traffic stops are afforded the justice that nearly eluded him. The surveillance footage that changed everything, grainy black and white images of a Honda Civic coming to a complete stop at an intersection, sits now in an evidence archive. A small moment unremarkable in itself that altered the trajectory of multiple lives and exposed a fracture in the system that might otherwise have remained hidden. Sometimes justice hangs by the most slender of threads: a text message, a camera angle, a mother who refuses to accept what she's told, a judge who questions what seems obvious. In the space between those threads lives balance precariously. For Jordan Carter, that precarious balance has resolved, at least for now, on the side of truth. As he steps forward into a future reclaimed, he carries with him the weight of knowing how easily it might have tipped the other way. If you've been moved by this extraordinary case of justice prevailing against all odds, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Where were you when you first heard about the Jordan Carter case? Has it changed how you think about our justice system? Your voice matters in this important conversation. Join our community of engaged viewers who care deeply about truth and accountability. The years that follow bring both progress and setbacks. Jordan Carter graduates from college with honors, his basketball career opening doors that his legal aspirations will eventually walk through. Judge Miriam Holt's work on the Police Accountability Commission leads to significant reforms in how evidence is documented and reviewed in cases like Jordan's. Naomi Park, galvanized by the Carter case, leaves the public defender's office to start a nonprofit focused on overturning wrongful convictions. Sergeant Thomas Keene serves 16 months in prison, a sentence some consider too lenient, others too harsh. Upon release, he disappears from public view, moving to another state where his name and face aren't associated with scandal. The scars of his actions, however, remain embedded in the community he once served. For Linda Carter, the ordeal transforms her too, from a mother solely focused on her son's future to an advocate for other parents navigating a system that can swallow their children whole. The support group she starts for families affected by similar cases grows from 3 people meeting in her living room to dozens gathering in a community center, sharing resources, contacts, and the simple comfort of understanding. 5 years after the case that changed everything, Jordan Carter returns to that same intersection, Maple and Birch, and pauses at the stop sign. Now a law student, he's home for spring break, driving the same Honda Civic, though the graduation tassels have been replaced by his undergraduate ones. He comes to a complete stop, counts to 3, and proceeds. Some habits once formed remain for life. Some lessons once learned are never forgotten. In the rear-view mirror, he catches a glimpse of the traffic camera that saved him. Still perched on its pole, still watching silently, he wonders how many other stories it has witnessed since his own. How many other lives have hung in the balance at this unremarkable corner in a mid-sized American town. The Carter case becomes something of a landmark in legal circles studied in ethics classes, cited in appeals referenced by reform advocates. The ripples from that rainy night in October continue to spread outward, touching lives Jordan will never know about. That's how change often works, not in dramatic sweeps of revolution, but in the quiet persistence of truth against falsehood, in the courage of those who question what they're told, in the determination of those who refuse to settle for convenient answers when inconvenient questions remain. 10 years later, attorney Jordan Carter stands in courtroom 7, the same room where his own fate was once decided. Now he's representing Noah Bennett, a 16-year-old facing charges that echo Jordan's own experience. The difference is that this time, the young man has an advocate who knows exactly what he's facing, who can look him in the eye and say with absolute conviction, "I believe you." Sometimes that's all it takes to begin unraveling an injustice. One person willing to believe when others doubt, to question when others accept, to persist when others give up. The story of Jordan Carter, of a traffic stop, a false accusation, and a judge who refused to look away becomes more than just a legal case. It becomes a testament to what's possible when truth is valued more than convenience. When justice is pursued, regardless of cost. When ordinary people refuse to accept the easy answer and demand instead the right one. In a system where perfection will always remain elusive. Perhaps that's the best we can hope for. Not that injustice will never occur, but that when it does, there will be those with the courage and commitment to correct it, to ensure that even when justice comes late, it still comes. As Jordan Carter stands before the court, now an advocate rather than a defendant, he carries with him not just the memory of his own ordeal, but the determination that arose from it, a commitment that the system that once failed him might, through his efforts and those of countless others, gradually become the system it always claimed to be. Justice is a journey, not a destination, a constant striving toward an ideal that remains just beyond reach. But in that striving lies hope. And in that hope lies the possibility of change, real change, the kind that transforms not just procedures and protocols, but hearts and minds. For Jordan Carter, for Judge Miriam Holt, for Date, Laura Vega, for Naomi Park, for all those whose lives were altered by a single traffic stop on a rainy October night. That journey continues. One case, one truth, one moment of courage at a time. If this story has resonated with you, if it's made you think differently about justice and truth in our world today, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Your engagement helps us continue bringing these important narratives to light. Share in the comments where you are watching from and what part of this story impacted you most deeply. Together, we can create a community dedicated to understanding these complex issues and working toward a more just society for everyone. The night before his law school graduation, Jordan Carter receives a letter. The envelope bears no return address, but the postmark is from a small town 3 states away. Inside is a single sheet of paper with 4 handwritten words. "I am truly sorry." There is no signature, but Jordan doesn't need one. He knows who sent it, just as he knows that no apology, however sincere, can fully repair what was broken. But perhaps he reflects as he carefully folds the letter and places it in his desk drawer. It's a start, a small acknowledgement that change is possible even in the most hardened hearts. The ceremony the next day is a blur of speeches, applause, and camera flashes. Linda Carter sits in the audience, pride radiating from her like light. Beside her is Jordan's father, home at last from his final deployment, the uniform exchanged for a suit that still seems to sit uncomfortably on his shoulders after so many years in military attire. They've all changed, these 3 Carters. The family that had once moved through life with the easy confidence of those who believe in the essential fairness of the world now carries a more nuanced understanding. Awareness that justice requires vigilance, that truth sometimes needs champions. As Jordan accepts his diploma, scanning the audience until he finds his parents' faces, he feels a complex emotion that defies simple naming, part triumph, part vindication, part lingering sadness for what was lost along the way. The path from that rainy night to this sunlit afternoon has been neither straight nor easy, but he has walked it with growing purpose. At the small family celebration afterward, Jordan raises a glass. "To second chances," he says, "and to those still waiting for their first." The toast encompasses more than just his own journey. It reaches out to encompass Malik Harris, now rebuilding his life after 18 months lost. Sophia Alvarez, her nursing license restored, but her confidence still fragile. Andre Miller, whose academic dreams were derailed but not destroyed. It extends to all those whose stories intersect with the justice system, whose lives hang in the balance of what we choose to see and what we choose to ignore. Judge Miriam Holt retires the following year. Her legacy secured not just by her years on the bench, but by the reforms her commission has implemented. Body cameras for all officers, stricter protocols for evidence handling, independent review of contested arrests. At her retirement dinner, she finds herself seated next to Date. Laura Vega, now a captain and head of internal affairs. "I've been meaning to ask you," Holt says, breaking the ice between them. "When did you first suspect Keene wasn't being truthful? Before the Carter case or during?" Vega considers the question carefully before answering. "There were moments, comments, little things that didn't add up, but I kept telling myself I was imagining it, that I was being disloyal for even thinking it. What changed?" "Jordan Carter," Vega says simply, the look in his eyes when he insisted he was innocent. It was the same look I'd seen 6 times before, but that time I finally let myself believe it might be true. Holt nods, understanding the courage such admission requires. It's never easy to question someone you trust. "No," Vega agrees, "but sometimes it's necessary." The conversation drifts to other topics, but its essence lingers between them. This shared understanding of how systems fail, how people fail, and what it takes to begin correcting those failures. 20 years after the case that changed the trajectory of his life, Jordan Carter, now a respected civil rights attorney with a national reputation, returns to Millfield to speak at his old high school. The gymnasium where he once practiced three-point shots now holds rows of folding chairs filled with students too young to remember the case that made local headlines 2 decades earlier. He tells them his story not as a victim seeking sympathy, but as someone who has transformed personal injustice into professional purpose. He speaks about the delicate balance between respecting authority and questioning it, about the courage it takes to stand alone when truth is at stake. The system isn't perfect, he tells them, because it's made of people, and people aren't perfect. But imperfect doesn't mean irredeemable. It means we have work to do, all of us together. Among the students listening is Sergeant Thomas Keene's grandson, a quiet 17-year-old with his grandfather's eyes, but his teacher's hope, a different heart. He doesn't identify himself to the speaker, but after the assembly, he lingers watching as Jordan shakes hands and answers questions. What he's looking for in the face of this man. His grandfather wronged, even he couldn't say forgiveness, perhaps, or bitterness. Some clue to help him reconcile the loving grandfather he knows with the corrupt officer. He's heard whispers about what he sees. Instead is something more complicated, a man who has neither forgotten nor been consumed by the injustice he experienced, who has used it as a foundation rather than a prison. There's a lesson in that, though it will take the boy years to fully understand it as the last students file out Coach Reynolds, now silver-haired, but still coaching approaches Jordan with a warm handshake that turns into an embrace. "You did good, son," Reynolds says, pride evident in his voice. "Real good." Jordan smiles, gesturing around the gymnasium. "It all started here, didn't it? The lessons that mattered most." Reynolds nods, understanding that Jordan isn't talking about basketball. The world has changed in the 2 decades since Jordan Carter's case. In some ways, for the better, in others, not enough. Body cameras, police reform initiatives, greater scrutiny of evidence handling procedures, all steps forward. Yet still, cases like his continue to emerge with disturbing regularity. The work remains unfinished, the journey ongoing. But in Millfield, at least, there's a traffic camera at the corner of Maple and Birch that stands as a silent reminder that sometimes truth finds a way to surface. That sometimes, against all odds, justice prevails. Before leaving town, Jordan drives past his old house, past the courthouse where his fate was decided, and finally to that intersection. He stops completely at the sign, counts to 3 as his father taught him, and proceeds. Some habits once formed remain for life. Some lessons once learned are never forgotten. And some stories once told continue to resonate, to remind us all that in the space between accusation and truth, between injustice and its remedy, lies the measure of who we are as a society and who we aspire to become. If this story has moved you, if it's made you think differently about justice in America today, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters in this ongoing conversation about truth, accountability, and the justice we all deserve. 25 years have passed since that rainy night at the intersection of Maple and Burr. Jordan Carter, now 52, with subtle flecks of gray at his temples, stands before the newly dedicated Millfield Justice Center. The modern glass building gleams in the autumn sunlight, a stark contrast to the weathered limestone courthouse where his case once unfolded. A small crowd has gathered for the dedication ceremony, mostly community leaders, legal professionals, and a few journalists from the local paper. The timing feels significant, perhaps even ordained. Today marks exactly a quarter-century since Sergeant Thomas Keene pulled Jordan over on his way home from basketball practice, setting in motion a chain of events that would ultimately expose a pattern of corruption and transform a community's understanding of justice. Jordan adjusts his tie, feeling the familiar flutter of anticipation that still accompanies public speaking, even after all these years of courtroom arguments and legislative testimony. As he scans the assembled faces, he recognizes many, some from his past, others from the journey that followed. In the front row sits his mother, Linda, now in her late 60s, her posture still straight, her gaze still sharp. Beside her is Naomi Park, the public defender whose dogged persistence helped uncover the truth when so many were content with convenient falsehood. Judge Miriam Holt isn't here. She passed away 3 years ago at the age of 84, leaving behind a legacy of judicial reforms that changed how evidence is evaluated across the state. But her presence is felt nonetheless, particularly in the building's main courtroom, which bears her name. "We gather today," begins the current mayor, a woman who was just a teenager when Jordan's case made headlines, "to dedicate more than just a building. We dedicate ourselves to the principles this structure represents. Truth, fairness, and the courage to question when questioning is necessary." Jordan listens, his mind drifting between present and past, between the man he is and the boy he was. His journey from wrongfully accused teenager to respected civil rights attorney hasn't been without obstacles. After law school, he'd faced subtle resistance from those uncomfortable with his history, with the questions his very presence seemed to raise about the system's reliability. But for every door that remained stubbornly closed, others opened, often pushed by those who recognized the unique perspective he brought to the practice of law. The mayor concludes her remarks and introduces Jordan as someone whose personal experience with injustice inspired a lifetime dedicated to preventing others from suffering the same fate. As Jordan approaches the podium, the past and present seem to overlap. For a moment, he's 17 again, standing before Judge Miriam Holt, his future hanging by the most tenuous of threads. Then the moment passes, and he's simply a man with a story to tell. A story that even after all these years still matters. 25 years ago, he begins, "I stood at a different intersection, not just Maple and Birch, where a traffic camera captured more than just my complete stop at a sign, but the intersection of truth and falsehood, of justice and its perversion." He speaks without notes, the words flowing from decades of reflection. "What happened to me was not unique. What was unique was that it was discovered, exposed, and corrected. For every case like mine that comes to light, countless others remain buried, hidden by lack of evidence, by systemic indifference, by the simple, devastating power of an officer's word against a citizen's." In the audience, heads nod in somber understanding. Millfield has changed in the years since Jordan's case, become more diverse, more reflective about its institutions, more willing to acknowledge painful truths about how justice is administered and to whom. But the work remains unfinished. The goal of true equality before the law, still more aspiration than reality. "This building," Jordan continues, gesturing to the gleaming structure behind him, "represents our community's commitment to doing better. The Holt Judicial Reform Act, the mandatory body camera requirements, the Independent Evidence Review Commission. These are not just policies and procedures, they are promises. Promises that what happened to me, to Malik Harris, to Sophia Alvarez, to Andre Miller, and to so many others whose names we may never know will become increasingly rare." He pauses his gaze, finding his mother's. The strength he sees there, the same strength that drove her to question, to investigate, to refuse to accept what she was told about her son, still inspires him daily. But buildings and laws aren't enough. True justice requires vigilance. It requires ordinary citizens willing to question authority when necessary. It requires officers with the integrity to police themselves and each other. It requires prosecutors more interested in truth than in conviction rates. It requires judges who understand that their highest duty is not to the system, but to justice itself. As he speaks, Jordan notices a figure at the back of the crowd, an elderly man leaning heavily on a cane, his face partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. There's something familiar in the set of the shoulders, in the way the head tilts slightly, as if listening intently. But before Jordan can place him, the figure turns and slowly walks away. The most important lesson I learned through my ordeal, Jordan continues, drawing his attention back to his speech, wasn't about the failings of our system, though those were certainly laid bare. It was about its capacity for correction, about the possibility that exists when truth is valued above convenience. When a mother refuses to believe the worst about her son, when a detective questions her partner, when a judge looks beyond the badge to the evidence itself, he speaks for another 10 minutes about specific reforms, about ongoing challenges, about the work that remains undone. When he concludes, the applause is warm but thoughtful. Not the perfunctory acknowledgement of a speech well delivered, but the deeper recognition of truths that resonate. As the crowd disperses, Jordan finds himself approached by a young man in his early 20s with a familiar set to his jaw that triggers an old memory. "Mr. Carter," the young man says, extending his hand. "Liam Keene, Sergeant Thomas Keene's grandson." The name lands like a physical blow, momentarily robbing Jordan of words. He takes the offered hand automatically, studying the face before him, searching for traces of the man who nearly destroyed his future with calculated lies. "I was at your speech at Millfield High 5 years ago," Liam continues, seeming to understand Jordan's momentary speechlessness. "You didn't know who I was then. I didn't introduce myself, but what you said that day, it changed things for me." Jordan finds his voice. Changed things. "How?" "I grew up with whispers," Liam explains. "Family secrets. No one would tell me exactly what my grandfather had done, just that he'd made mistakes on the force. After your speech, I started researching. Found the old news articles, court records." He pauses, swallowing hard. "I found the truth." Jordan nods, unsure where this conversation is heading, but sensing its importance to the young man before him. "It's why I decided to become a lawyer," Liam continues. "Not to defend what he did, it was indefensible, but to understand how someone who was by all other accounts a decent man could do something so fundamentally wrong, and to make sure I never make the same choices." There's earnestness in his voice that touches something in Jordan. A recognition that the ripples from that night 25 years ago continue to spread outward, affecting lives in ways he could never have anticipated. "Your grandfather," Jordan says carefully, "is still alive?" Liam nods. "He lives with my parents now. His health isn't good. He doesn't go out much anymore." "Was that him?" Jordan asks, gesturing to where the elderly man had stood at the back of the crowd. "Yes," Liam admits. "He wanted to come. Said he needed to, but he couldn't bring himself to approach you." Jordan absorbs this information slowly, emotions he thought long resolved, stirring again. What would he have said, do you think, if he had? Liam considers the question with the same thoughtfulness Jordan had noticed in his speech at the high school. I think he would have said he spent 25 years trying to understand why he did what he did, and that he still doesn't have a good answer, just the knowledge that it was wrong, and that he can never fully make amends. The simple truth of this, its acknowledgement of both responsibility and its limits, resonates with Jordan. In his years as an attorney, he's encountered many forms of accountability, many versions of reckoning, some loud and public, others quiet and private. He's come to believe that true justice lies not in punishment alone, but in acknowledgement, in the recognition of harm done, and in the commitment, however belated, to a different path forward. "Would you tell him something for me?" Jordan asks. "Of course. Tell him I stopped counting a long time ago." Liam's brow furrows in confusion. "The 3-second rule at stop signs," Jordan clarifies. "My father taught me to count to 3 before proceeding through an intersection. If I hadn't done that, if the traffic camera hadn't shown me making a complete stop, your grandfather's false testimony might never have been discovered." Understanding dawned in Liam's eyes. "For years afterward," Jordan continues, "I kept counting 1, 2, 3 at every stop sign, as if those 3 seconds had saved me, which in a way they had, but somewhere along the way, I stopped counting out loud." The habit remained, but the fear behind it faded. He pauses, choosing his next words carefully. "That's what I'd want your grandfather to know. That what he did changed me, marked me, but it didn't define me. That I found a way forward that wasn't dominated by what happened that night. And that perhaps he can too." Liam nods, visibly moved. "I'll tell him." As they part ways, Jordan feels a sense of completion. Not the neat closure of fiction, but the messy, imperfect resolution that real life typically offers. There will always be a part of him that remains that frightened 17-year-old in the rain, just as there will always be a part of Thomas Keene that remains the officer who betrayed his oath. But neither of them is only that moment, that choice, that version of themselves. Later that evening at a small reception hosted by the mayor, Jordan finds himself standing next to Detective, now Police Commissioner Laura Vegas. At 64, she carries herself with the same quiet authority he remembers, though her hair has gone completely silver and lines have deepened around her eyes. "Quite a building," she remarks, nodding toward the Justice Center, visible through the windows. "Holt would have been proud." "Yes," Jordan agrees, "though I think she'd say the building matters less than what happens inside it." Vega smiles, acknowledging the truth in this. "You know, after your case, after what Keene did came to light, I spent months wondering if I could have prevented it, if I should have seen the signs earlier, spoken up sooner." Jordan studies her, hearing the old weight of responsibility in her voice. "And did you come to any conclusions?" "Only that questioning is easier in retrospect than in the moment," she says. "And that loyalty is valuable right up until the point where it becomes complicity. It's a distinction Jordan has thought about often in his own career. The line between supporting colleagues and enabling misconduct, between respecting authority and surrendering judgment. In his work with police departments across the country, implementing reforms, and building bridges between law enforcement and communities, he's seen how this balance plays out in daily decisions. The real change, Vega continues, hasn't been in the buildings or even the laws. It's been in the culture, in what's acceptable, what's questioned, what's allowed to pass without comment. That's the legacy of your case more than anything." Before Jordan can respond, they're interrupted by the mayor, eager to introduce him to a state senator interested in expanding the Holt reform statewide. The conversation with Vega remains unfinished, but its essence lingers. This shared understanding of how systems change, not all at once, but incrementally through countless small choices made by individuals within them. As the evening winds down, Jordan finds a quiet moment to call his daughter Alexandra, a second-year law student at his alma mater. She answers on the third ring the sounds of a busy student lounge in the background. "Dad, how was the ceremony?" "Good," he tells her. "In'll wish you could have been here." "Me too," she says, "but these exam preparations are brutal. Mom says hi, by the way. She's sorry she couldn't make it either." Jordan and Linda divorced amicably a decade earlier, the relationship having gradually transformed from romance to friendship to something more like family without the marriage. They remain close, united by their daughter and by the history they've shared. "I met Keen's grandson today," he tells her, knowing she'll understand the significance. "Wow." Alexander breathes. "That's intense. What was that like?" "Complicated." Jordan admits he's studying law now, partly because of what his grandfather did. Wants to make sure he never makes the same choices. "So, something good came from something bad," Alexandra observes. "Like with you, it's a simplification, but not entirely wrong." Jordan has never framed his career as a silver lining to what happened. The injustice remains unjustifiable, but he acknowledges that his path was shaped by that experience, that his understanding of the law is informed by having been on the wrong side of its application. "Something like that." He agrees. "Though I'd still rather it never happened. But then you might not be who you are," Alexandra points out with the directness he's always valued in her. "And a lot of people who have been helped by your work might not have been." It's a perspective Jordan has considered before. This impossible calculus of suffering and growth, of injustice and its repercussions. There's truth in what she says, but it doesn't negate the wrong that was done, the pain that was caused, the lives that were damaged. "Maybe," he concedes, "but that doesn't make what Keen did right." "Of course not," Alexander agrees. "Just complex." After they hang up, Jordan steps outside onto the balcony of the reception venue. From here, he can see most of downtown Millfield, the old courthouse, the new Justice Center, and between them, the intersection of Maple and Birch, now marked by a small commemorative plaque most visitors to the town probably never notice. 25 years ago, he stopped at that intersection, counting to 3, as his father had taught him. In doing so, he set in motion a sequence of events that would expose corruption, overturn convictions, transform a police department, and ultimately shape his own future in ways he could never have imagined. The traffic camera that captured his complete stop is long gone, replaced by more advanced technology. But its impact lingers in the Holt reforms, in the careers of those affected by the case, in the ongoing conversation about justice and accountability that continues in Millfield and beyond. As Jordan looks out over the town where he grew up, where he faced his greatest challenge, and where he has now returned to mark this anniversary, he feels neither triumph nor bitterness. Instead, there's a quiet recognition of how far they've come and how far they still have to go, of how justice is never finally achieved, but always in the process of becoming, of how truth, once revealed, cannot be unlearned, even as new truths wait to be discovered. The path from that rainy night to this clear autumn evening has been neither straight nor easy. There have been victories and setbacks, progress and regression. But standing here now, looking at the town, transformed partly through his own efforts, Jordan Carter feels something that might with caution be called hope. Not the naive hope of his youth before he understood how deeply flawed our systems can be, nor the cynical hope that masks resignation in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges, but a mature hope, tempered by experience, yet still vital. A hope that acknowledges both how much has changed and how much remains unchanged, that celebrates progress while refusing to mistake it for completion. It's the kind of hope that sustains not just through dramatic moments of vindication, but through the long, often unglamorous work of reform. The kind that recognizes justice not as a destination finally reached, but as a direction persistently followed. The kind that understands that even when the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice, it requires human hands to help shape its curve. As darkness falls over Millfield, the lights of the Justice Center illuminate the town square. Jordan turns away from the view and heads back inside where the work continues, where the conversation goes on, where the promise of a more just future awaits not just those who demand it, but those willing to build it. One decision, one reform, one changed mind at a time. The following morning, Before leaving Millfield to return to his practice in the city, Jordan makes one last stop. He parks his car at the edge of Oakwood Cemetery and follows the familiar path to a simple headstone bearing the name Miriam Holt. 1962-2022. Judge Miriam Holt, the woman whose unflinching demand for truth had changed the trajectory of his life. Jordan places a small arrangement of white roses against the granite marker. It's become a tradition over the years, this quiet acknowledgement of the debt he owes her. Not just for his own case, but for the precedent it set, for the other lives touched by her refusal to accept convenient answers when inconvenient questions remained. "We dedicated the new Justice Center yesterday," he says aloud, the morning air still and clear around him. "Name the main courtroom after you. There was a lot of talk about legacy and reform." He pauses, gathering his thoughts. In the distance, birds call to one another across the cemetery grounds. "I met Keene's grandson. He's studying law now. Wants to understand what happened, why his grandfather did what he did. I'm not sure anyone really knows the answer to that. Not even Keene himself." The conversation feels one-sided, yet somehow complete, as if Holt's characteristic directness lives on in the silence that answers him. "I keep thinking about what you told me after the case was dismissed, that justice isn't just about outcomes, it's about process, about asking the right questions even when the answers are uncomfortable. I've tried to live by that." As he turns to leave, Jordan notices an elderly man standing several yards away watching him. Even at this distance, there's no mistaking who it is. Thomas Keene, now in his 70s, stooped and diminished by age, but unmistakably the same man who once falsely accused him of possessing drugs. For a moment, neither moves. The gulf between them, 25 years and a profound injustice, seems both vast and suddenly strangely bridgeable. It's Keene who finally approaches his steps, slow and deliberate, leaning heavily on a cane. "Mr. Carter," he says, his voice rougher than Jordan remembers, but the eyes the same, the eyes that had once looked at a 17-year-old honor student and seen only a suspect. "I wasn't sure I'd have the chance to speak with you." Jordan nods, acknowledging both the greeting and its underlying meaning. "Your grandson said you were at the dedication." "I was." Keene confirms, "I followed your career over the years, the cases you've taken, the reforms you've advocated for." There's an awkward pause filled with all the words that remain unspoken between them. Accusations and defenses, questions and explanations, apologies that can never be adequate, and forgiveness that can never be complete. "I won't ask for your forgiveness," Keene says finally. "What I did to you to the others, it's not something that can be forgiven away. But I wanted you to know that not a day goes by that I don't regret it, that I don't think about the harm I caused." Jordan studies the man before him, not the authoritative figure he remembers from that rainy night, but someone diminished by time and perhaps by the weight of his own actions. "Why did you do it?" Jordan asks the question he's carried for 25 years, finally finding voice. "Not just to me, but to all of us." "Why?" Keene doesn't answer immediately. When he does, his voice is quiet, reflective. "I told myself it was about making the streets safer, that the people I targeted were probably guilty of something, even if not what I claimed, that the ends justified the means." He shakes his head slowly. "But that was just what I told myself. The truth is, I don't fully know. It started small cutting corners, planting evidence when I was certain someone was guilty, but couldn't prove it. Then it became easier, a habit. A way to meet quotas, get commendations. The admission hangs between them, neither exonerating nor entirely damning, simply human in its complexity, its mixture of self-deception and gradual moral compromise. Your case, the traffic camera footage, it forced me to see what I'd become." Keene continues, The months afterward, the investigation, my arrest, that was justice. My time in prison was justice, but living with what I did, that's been the real sentence. Jordan absorbs these words, finding in them neither satisfaction nor further anger, just the recognition of a truth long suspected but never confirmed. I don't know if I can forgive you, Jordan says honestly, but I do know that what happened changed both our lives. It led me to where I am now, to work that matters. That makes a difference. Keene nods, accepting this partial absolution for what it is. Not eraser of the past, but acknowledgement that from great wrong, something of value has emerged. Judge Miriam Holt once told me, Jordan adds, gesturing to the headstone beside them, that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about restoration, about finding a way forward that acknowledges harm done while creating space for something better to take its place. As they part ways, these two men whose lives intersected so disastrously on a rainy night a quarter century ago, there's a sense not of closure exactly, but of continuation. The story that began at that traffic stop doesn't end with this encounter. It lives on in Jordan's work, in the reforms Holt championed, in Liam Keene's choice to study law, in the new Justice Center bearing Holt's name in its main courtroom. It lives on in all those whose understanding of justice has been shaped by a case that exposed both the system's vulnerabilities and its capacity for correction, its potential to fail, and its possibility for redemption. As Jordan drives out of Millfield later that morning, he passes the intersection of Maple and Birch one final time. The traffic light turns red, and he comes to a complete stop. He doesn't count to 3 anymore, hasn't for years, but the habit of careful observation remains. The understanding that sometimes the most important things are the ones we almost miss, the discrepancies that seem small until someone has the courage to question them. The light turns green. Jordan proceeds forward, leaving behind the town that shaped him, carrying with him its lessons about justice and injustice, about courage and compromise, about the long, unfinished journey toward the world we claim to want. If this story has moved you, if it's made you think differently about justice in our world today, please subscribe to our channel and join the conversation in the comments below. Your voice matters, and together we can work toward a system that truly delivers on its promise of justice for all.